Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the Alexander Galetovic webinar in honor of our late professor. With this, we complete the first year of the webinar. We had guests as Brad DeLong, Alan Blinder, Taylor Bowes, and Sebastian Edwards. So to wrap up this first year, we have an excellent guest, Simon Johnson, who is a professor of entrepreneurship at the MIT Sloan School of Management. In 2007 to 2008, he was the chief economist at the IMF. He is one of the most recognized economists that analyze the interaction between institution and economics. In addition, he was one of the first ones to point out the financial oligarchy in the US in his column, The Quiet Cap, which I remember using as a teaching material back in 2009. But now I see that it has been read over 1 million times. So to get a sense of how important that little piece of writing was. So he's gonna present his most recent book with Daron Acemoglu, Power and Progress, our 1,000-year struggle over technology and prosperity. It explores basically the history and economics of major technological transformations, and that includes what everyone is talking about now, which is artificial intelligence. And after his presentation, which should last between 20 and 30 minutes, we have Pablo Garcia, who is the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Chile since February 2022, and board member since January 2014. He's the president of the Arvin Fisher Committee of BIS since September 2022 for the next 3 years, and he is moderating a session about technology for what we learned today. So thank you, Simon. Thank you, everyone who is here, and you can start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Bernardo. It's really a terrific privilege and honor to be with you today. And I know we only have an hour. I'm really looking forward to questions and comments and feedback because, as you said, Bernardo, these issues are everywhere, all at once around the world. What is artificial intelligence? What is it going to do to our lives? What's it going to do to our economy? And the issue that Daron, Acemoglu, and I focus on in our book is, what is it going to do to our jobs? So we wrote the book a few years ago, thinking that AI might be of interest to people in 2023, and have been a little bit overwhelmed by the global interest in understanding what exactly is this transformation, this particular form of technology, but also more broadly, I would say 3 questions that I'll speak to. First of all, can we deliberately, as humans, as voters, as governments, as policymakers and as policy advisors, can we shape technology? Is that something within human control, or is technology just something that comes to us and we have to deal with it? That's the first question. The second question is, should we try to shape technology? So can we shape it, but should we? And that I think is an interesting question. That's why we wrote a 500-page book. And then the third question, Bernardo and everyone, is, will we shape technology? And of course, will we shape it in a way that we might agree today or at some point in the future is a sensible, responsible direction? And here I can report from the front lines of policy discussions in the United States and some other countries, but I'm very interested to hear what's being discussed in Chile. And I had another conversation earlier this week with Taiwan. There's conversations that we're having every week with people in very far-flung places, the conversations that are proceeding on parallel lines that we can talk about. So the first question is, can we shape technological change? And I think the answer to this question is absolutely, unequivocally, yes, we can. And the reason I say that is because we've done it before. We've actually done it before on a number of occasions. And while we're talking about books, I'll mention my previous book with John Gruber, who's now the chair of the MIT Department of Economics, Jumpstarting America. We focused on American history and the economics of scientific investigation and technological innovation. And we argued that at least from the 1940s, definitely in the 1950s, and it was going full steam in the 1960s, the US and other countries were pushing very hard technology in particular directions. Sometimes, or at least initially, these were defense applications. The space program, of course, was an outgrowth of partly concerns about missiles, partly a response to the Soviet Union. But the impetus, the effort put into promoting science, generating spillover effects, and creating knowledge that can then become companies, that has been much broader over the past 60 or 70 years than just weapons. So it's in pharmaceuticals, it's in digital computers. It is, of course, all that is the origin of the internet, and a lot of things have been built on top of the internet. AI, and a lot of the AI research has also been supported by government grants and plenty of funding along the way. So we certainly have shaped technology in the past, and we can do it again. I think honestly that places like the United States became a little negligent in terms of thinking about this over the past couple of decades. There was a lot of reliance on the private sector to carry innovation forward, but we begin to understand, and I think social media in particular has taught us that relying on the private sector to drive innovation will give you some forms of change, but not other ones that you may want. So let me devote more of my time to the second question, which is, should we shape technological progress? And here I think I know we're addressing a belief that is so fundamental among economists and among economic policymakers that it doesn't even have a name. So we gave it a name, and we called it the productivity bandwagon effect. And the way the bandwagon effect works, or is supposed to work, is that technology changes, productivity improves, that raises the demand for labor, that increases wages, and everyone gains from that technological change eventually. Now, you hear this all the time in discussions of historical episodes, and also about with regard to current policy, and you definitely hear it with regard to AI. So there are many people who say, okay, AI may cause some disruptive impacts. Sure, you might lose some jobs in this reshuffling of the economy, but don't worry, everyone is going to gain eventually. So the next time you hear that, I want you to ask the question to whoever it is who's making this claim: how long is eventually? We talk in the book about many episodes in history. That the book covers 1,000 years in some detail, actually, but we also go back and look at other episodes in recorded history, and to the extent that they're relevant. And I think the one that speaks most directly to this issue and this moment is actually what happened at the start of the Industrial Revolution in Britain. So by the 1780s, there was a revolution underway in the spinning of cotton, and this was the beginning of the prosperity in the north of England, Manchester, Liverpool, and a global trade in cotton and in cotton goods. 1780, Industrial Revolution is going. In the 1840s, we know for a fact, because this was a subject of repeated investigations, that children as young as 6 were pushing coal carts deep underground with their heads for 12 hours a day in pitch black. Right. So from 1780 to 1840, I can give you a very long list of technological improvements, including in cotton, including in metalworking, including in coal mining. What was the impact on people's lives, ordinary people's lives? It wasn't positive. Now, maybe you can argue about how negative was it? Was it flat? Was it a little bit negative? Was it distributional? Fine, we can have that argument. But this was not the kind of positive transformation that we wish to have from an amazing technological revolution. So that's a 60-year lag. And if the answer on AI is, well, eventually it will be 60 years, frankly, that's too long. And I think you should then, the follow-up question is, look, haven't we learned enough from 200 plus years of industrial transformation, from 40 years of digital transformation? Haven't we learned either enough or at least some things that will accelerate the sharing of the benefits? And I think on this point, the key issue is, if Daron and I had written this book in 1980, 40 years ago, we would have had very little to complain about, because the problem I just laid out for you, lots of technology changing, lots of productivity improvements, but no wage gains, no improvement in hours, no improvement in working conditions, no improvement in living conditions. That linkage was solved substantially in Western Europe, in North America, in other countries, in the last third of the 19th century. So let's say between 1850 and 1870. And that sharing of prosperity through technological change continued at least until 1980. The problem is, some of the things that went right for that during that century have unraveled or don't exist today. And this is not a instant snap judgment. This is looking back over 40 years, 40 years. So what did we get right and what have we lost And what do we now seek to regain? Well, let me give you a couple of illustrations, I think, that make the point, the more general point, and some numbers. So Henry Ford, who is a controversial figure in history for his personal beliefs, but Henry Ford, without question, transformed the American auto industry and the production of cars and vehicles around the world. Right before Henry Ford came to Detroit and went into car production, the entire American auto industry made 2,400 cars. That was it in 1900. By the end of the 1920s, Ford and GM each were making around 1.5 million cars, and the American auto industry employed 400,000 people. Now, what Henry Ford did was a lot of automation. Henry Ford took car production onto a moving assembly line, and then he brought electricity to the assembly line. These were both really profound transformations. And let's be very clear, Henry Ford replaced people with machines in tasks that were previously done by people. That's automation at its heart. But at the same time, Ford and his engineers, and of course his competitors, created a lot of new jobs upstream, making all the pieces that go into cars, and downstream, everything about how you use cars and the entire large part of the American economy that still revolves around the automobile. And the key thing about these tasks, and I really want you to remember this, is that these tasks, most of them, required expertise. Why is this a key thing? Because if I have a job which can be done by anyone who I just meet on the street and I hire them, I'm not going to pay them a premium wage. I'm sorry, that's not how the world works, and you know that. But if I need them to have some expertise, if I need them to know something about my production process, something about my company, something, a craft, then I'm going to pay them a premium wage. That's a return on expertise. So what we got right in that 100 years, roughly 100 years before 1980 was, we automated a lot, let's be clear, but we also created a lot of new tasks in this whole industrialization process. We also had strong labor unions. So the United Auto Workers went on strike several times in the 1930s to demand participation in the benefits of those productivity gains that Ford and GM and others had unlocked with the technology. So new tasks, labor unions, and by the way, a lot of democracy, a lot of arguing in politics, but a lot of laws and regulations that made it possible for unions to exist. It made it possible to share the benefits in other ways. There were regulations on minimum wages and so on. What's the problem after 1980? Why are we worried about the arrival of AI at this moment? Well, we've not been good at creating new tasks over the past 4 decades. Digital transformations absolutely amounted to automation, but as I'm sure most of you are aware, in industrial countries, we hollowed out the middle class. So a lot of that automation eliminated jobs that were previously held by people who'd had finished high school but didn't have more education than that, let's say. These people previously did have good jobs, union jobs, jobs with expertise. They got pushed down to the lower end of the labor market, where they compete with people who don't have much by the way of skills, and that's pretty intense competition and low wages. Job market polarization is the term that our colleague David Autor at MIT has coined for this phenomenon. And David and Daron and I are co-directors of a center at MIT that is all about investigating the future of work. So digital transformation led to job market polarization. Unions became very weak. That's partly about automation. It's also about globalization. It may also be about political change. And in terms of democracy, well, let me say this. In the 1920s, leading voices of American capitalism gave speeches in which they said something along the following lines. American capitalism is great because we treat our workers well, they're highly productive, we pay them high salaries that they earn, and then they can buy our products like our cars or our washing machines. That was shareholder capitalism in the 1920s. Shareholder capitalism after 1980 has not been about that, and I think you all know. It's much more inclined to treat workers as a cost to be minimized rather than a resource to be developed. Which leads me to the policy question, and I think this is a question that we all face right now, which is, which way do we go with artificial intelligence? Because AI has the potential to do one of two things. It could either exacerbate and make worse the job market polarization. You could wipe out a set of jobs that one CEO referred to them as cut and paste jobs, meaning jobs that people do that are not entirely routine, but they don't require an advanced degree, don't require a lot of creativity, don't require too much by the way of original thought. That set of jobs could easily be eliminated by AI, and perhaps it will be. But at the same time, or maybe we should say alternatively, we could focus AI not on replacing people, but on complementing their abilities, on augmenting human skills. Now, let's be clear, every machine augments someone, right? Even if I totally automate absolutely everything, somebody's got to build the machine, somebody has to take care of the machine. It may only be two people, but that's going to happen. What we're talking about on this worker-friendly AI, which is what we're calling it, and encouraging everyone else to call it, is developing AI-type assistant that will help you if you're a plumber, an electrician, a nurse, a teacher, or anyone across our economy, anyone who has some skills, some expertise, but needs to become more expert, better at what they do, because if they're better at what they do, that creates the potential for them to earn more money as well as be more productive, and therefore the extra money is justified. So the question that we are putting to our political representatives, and you know, this is America, so we have a lot of political representatives. We always have arguments and a lot of churning, and there is a process. I can tell you a little bit more about the detail if you're interested, but there is an active process of consideration of these issues in the United States right now. So my colleague Daron testified to one high-profile panel on workforce 2 weeks ago and another panel on national security this week. And there is, encouragingly, a lot of interest on both sides of the political aisle, meaning Republicans and Democrats. They are both interested in how do we reduce that job market polarization? Can we rebuild the middle? Because losing the middle is bad for many things. I mean, as you know, among other things, it leads to a lot of anger at the system. It leads to a lot of populism. It leads to a lot of backlash. And I think you're all quite aware of the way in which that we've seen that in the United States, the way in which we may see it again. So finding ways to strengthen the middle, prevent it from being hollowed out. And then the question is, what are the policies that will do that? And I'll conclude with three acronyms, because obviously understanding my English is hard enough. So I'm going to give you three acronyms that you can write down and remember and impress all your other Spanish language speaking friends and your English language speaking friends, by the way. The three acronyms are DARPA, OSHA, and OSTP. So DARPA is the Defense Department's Advanced Research Program. Okay, I'm not absolutely insisting that the Department of Defense do this, because there are some issues. I think Pablo might speak to that about if you let the military, if you don't want to encourage the military too much to do AI. But DARPA, if you remember, had a big impact on promoting self-driving cars. And they did this with some high-profile tournaments with actually quite small prize money, but it was very prestigious. And that was the government's attention. Perhaps there are future contracts. Perhaps we can just become famous. We need DARPA equivalent effort focused on human complementary technology. And it doesn't cost a lot of money. What it is shifting how people imagine technology. What is the future we want? You can either let the billionaires define it for you, and we can talk about them if you want, but don't think you're going to be super happy with what they give you, or we can find other ways to define the technology, coming from the technologists, coming from the government, coming from civil society. So a DARPA type idea. OSHA is the agency that regulates occupational safety and health, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration in the US. So this is what's allowed in factories and in workplaces. And this is a key point here, is surveillance. So in the United States, people on the left and people on the right are both very worried about increased surveillance. They actually think different people are surveilling them, which is a little interesting. But that's okay. We can work with this, because there needs to be safeguards on surveillance, so that if surveillance in the warehouse makes you safer and reduces industrial accidents, it's okay. But if that surveillance is pushing you to work harder and you're more likely to have accidents, that I think is not going to be allowed, or at least going to be strongly discouraged. And the contrast I would make here is with China. China, and we document this in our book, China is pursuing a surveillance-heavy version of AI for reasons that you can all understand immediately. And they will be selling that technology, I think actually a lot, to some extent they already are, around the world. So the cost of becoming authoritarian has come down a lot because you can use these surveillance systems. Now, that's going to raise a lot of interesting questions about the extent to which countries want to trade with each other and encourage businesses in other countries to use surveillance that's frowned upon or actively not allowed in their own countries. So implications for international trade, we can talk about that. But in any case, I think, and I hope Chile will join the United States and Western Europe and many other democracies in having appropriate safeguards around surveillance uses, and privacy, basic human privacy needs to be protected. And the third piece is OSTP. That's the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House. Okay, again, I'm not insisting that OSTP exactly be the agency in charge, but the point is they're supposed to coordinate science policy and make sure the government understands what is being developed. And one of the major problems that policymakers have is that most of the top computer science talent in AI is being pulled into the private sector because they can make a lot more money, and also it's a lot more exciting because you can get your hands on really huge amounts of data and train the next generation of models. So we need a much more integrated, strengthened central capability to understand AI and what it's offering and who may be harmed and what kind of further policy should be developed. I have to tell you that if you use the word regulation in a sentence with actually any technology, but certainly information technology and certainly AI, if you use regulation and you say the word regulation, you imply it will be applied to AI. Some member of staff in that conversation will say China, right? If you regulate, then China will get an advantage. China will pull ahead of us. It's not going to happen. So you need to be we need to be very strategic, but we also need to be very responsible. This is a technology coming from the United States, primarily, 98%, and coming to you, to the world, to everyone, all at once, like ChatGPT, which I think was being used within hours, if not minutes, of being released. It was being used everywhere in the world. So this is a huge responsibility that we have to take seriously. And I really hope that many other places, including Chile, will be actively engaged in this conversation. And we can make this, it's a global technology, it's a global responsibility. We need to make it a global conversation. Thank you very much.
That was great, Simon. And so the book is already available in Spanish, in Planeta de Libros, Editorial Planeta, básicamente. So I left in the chat the link if you want to purchase it, both electronically and physically. So Paulo, you can go ahead, please.
Thank you. Well, I have a few slides, but first I want to say that the book is great. The book can be used in many ways. I want to highlight a few that complement what Simon has said, because clearly the issue of AI is present in everybody's minds. But I think the book is significantly more than that. It's something that helps you think about AI, but it helps you think about many other things that I guess are important for us as economists. So let me share the slides here. And first, well, thanks for the university for having the chance to be here. Bernardo missed one part of my resume, which is I'm a graduate from MIT from '99. I didn't have a chance to interact with Simon at the time, but Acemoglu was there, and then I went to the IMF right after you left, so we didn't have the chance to see each other there. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that Power and Progress is a very important book. My sense is that over the past several years, economists have been writing important books, and this is another one of them. And I think this is good for the profession, and this is good also for non-economists. For non-economists, if you read the book and if you like history, you'll enjoy it a lot because it shows with a lot of detail the type of innovation that have been occurring over a millennia. And also it shows that there was nothing mechanic or automatic about it. It was a result of a lot of interactions, a lot of maybe chance, but also institutional designs and actual choices that societies and people made. So I think that's important because sometimes non-economists think that progress is something automatic that just happens. For economists, I think it's also very important because it dismisses this idea that just innovation is kind of inherent to everybody, and if you just let the invisible hand, play out, we'll get better stuff, we'll get technological progress, and we'll get this productivity bandwagon, this kind of automatic lifting of all boats through economic growth, which is a pretty prevalent story when we teach economics. The other co-author of Simon and Daron is Robinson. The three of you wrote this very important book about the colonial imprint of our current institutions. This has been an extremely innovative book that came out with Acemoglu and Robinson on institutions, why nations fail, and now you with Daron are putting politics back into economics, and this is, I think, has a very significant impact on how we teach economics. I think we have a problem in how we teach economics, and this book provides kind of a way of trying to solve that problem. It's a big book, okay? So you have to take it. You have to take it with a big amount of humility and patience, because there's a lot in this book. I found that it's better taken in small pieces, and also you don't need to read it from beginning to end. You can pick specific chapters. The initial chapters are very good at laying out what is being told later on. Then the 10 or so chapters, you can look at them specifically if you want to focus on specific things, and I think that is also a useful way to look at it. The book has something that I don't see often. It has a bibliographical essay at the end, which is fantastic, because in a span of a few pages, Simon and Daron writes a very good narrative of how economic research fits into their story and their framework. And I think this should be mandatory reading in economic classes, in both graduate and undergraduate classes. Everybody should read this. I've learned a lot. It makes a lot of sense. Everything is there. The references are there. So instead of a typical book where you go and then you have tons and tons of references and footnotes and backgrounds, here you have a paper that explains how the literature that it exists fits into the story that they're putting together. So it is actually kind of a standalone product. It helps you to read the book, but it also stands by itself, and I really congratulate you for doing it. I think it's a great product. Now, what is the framework? The framework is power and progress. It's right there on the title. So the idea is actually quite simple, but super interesting. First, that the fact of technological change and innovation, what it does, it creates rents. That's why innovators are doing stuff. You want to create new stuff that makes you richer. You have these innovators, the innovator elite that is pushing things. But then how this ends up being distributed and whether it goes into all the corners in the economy and helps everybody, it's a thing that matters. That depends on the political system and political interactions. And the same politics then feed back into the way we do technological advancement. So it is a system or a framework that mixes what we know about technological progress, but also on what we as economists do not know much, which is about the politics and how these two things interact. I think that's actually a very interesting framework. It brings about something that non-economists will surely agree. So here I have a quote from Slavoj Zizek, this Marxist philosopher from Eastern Europe, that has a sentence, or a quote, has many quotes, but this is what is actually quite good, that says, you can't really change people, right? But you can change the system so that people aren't pushed to do bad things. And this is, you could think about an economist saying this, because economists, I believe we don't think that people are good or bad, but we just follow incentives. And so non-economists can actually agree with this framework very much. Now, it has some controversial ideas. So one controversial idea, this is not an exact quote, but I think it's extremely powerful. It says that for most of human history, innovation basically has benefited a very small clique of oligarchs, providing little benefit to the overall population. They mentioned the Gothic cathedral, so all the advancements in agriculture in the Middle Ages that created a very significant increase in the surplus. What the surplus did was essentially fund monuments. And for a long span of history, what we have been good at as humanity is just building monuments. But for what purpose? To feed the ego or the wealth or the power of this vision oligarchs, but with very little benefit to the overall population. This is actually a strikingly controversial idea, because when we read and learn about history, we look at these monuments as the heights of culture and humanity, but the human cost of doing this was brutal. And one can ask today whether it would have been worthwhile to have maybe smaller churches. Maybe the Protestant movement and Reformation was precisely about that, right? get out all the power accumulated in the Catholic Church and spread it to the communities. So this is, I think, a strikingly controversial idea, because it challenges our view of human progress and history. The second big issue I want to say is that, well, there is a solution, which is, just give all the power to the workers. This was the main agenda of Marxism, the dictatorship of the proletariat. The problem is that, as is well known, the problem with Marxism is that it took progress as given. So it actually had the same flaw that I think we also teach our students in economics, saying that progress and technology progress is something that sort of comes out of the air. And I'm doing a really bad quote from Tropic Thunder. Well, we should never go full Marxist, okay? Because it is very dangerous. The book quotes Marx, and they also quote Stalin, and it quotes also the Chinese Communist Party, and with good reason, because going this direction clearly will provide a problem. But maybe theoretically you give a lot of power to the most disadvantaged classes, but that risk to have no progress in the future. Now, what is the problem on how we teach economics? I think there are three problems that this book highlights a way around. The first way that we teach economics that is, I think, misleading, is that we teach that the production function is kind of an exogenous feature of the economy. Instead, how we should teach economics is that capital and labor both complement and substitute each other. There is this very strange relationship between capital and labor, that capital needs labor, but capital competes with labor at the same time. And how you structure the production function is not exogenous. The degree of complementarity and the degree of substitution is a result of who owns capital, who owns labor, and how they interact in the political sphere. So the way we design the production function is an explicit choice or a result of the political system. It's not a feature of the environment. Second problem, this is something I always try to teach when I teach about economic growth and trade, is that we tend to assume that technology is constant returns to scale and that utility is homothetic. I remember when I was learning about constant returns to scale in school, and the main result is that the size of the firm is indeterminate and the scale is irrelevant. And the main stylized fact that you would be presented to support this idea is that, well, the global corporate sector is not dominated by a few monopolies. And I think that's clearly not the case today. Today, we clearly see the emergence of the big techs that end up having a lot of market power in very different sectors, and therefore constant return scale is not really a good paradigm. And finally, the welfare theorems. Here, we know from behavioral economics that the framing of the problems is really key in how we tell the story. And the way we explain the welfare theorems is by saying, well, the market equilibrium is Pareto optimal. You cannot make anybody else better. And any Pareto optimum can be sustained with transfers. So that's it. It's kind of the perfect system. But I think we should do it the other way around. We should say, we need perfect competition, we need complete markets, and we need perfect information. And then the transfers are a matter of the politics. So it takes a lot of work to actually achieve a situation where the welfare theorems are applicable. When we teach economics, particularly at the undergrad level, we tend to brush it off. This idea that economics is only about theory and technical aspects, and politics is just a dirty thing that we need to leave to the politicians, is flat out wrong. We need to think about it from the get-go. So there is a lot of work to be done, because once you put politics into the idea how the economy works, we need a model about how politics work. And that's very hard for economists to do. We need to think harder about how politics work and how we interact that with the economy in a more general way. And surely Simon and Daron are up to the task of doing so. We look forward for what you come up with in the next few years. So thanks a lot, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. Do you want to react to that, or we can collect questions if you prefer?
I said thank you. I mean, I don't know what else I can say. It was a brilliant discussion.
So if you leave your hands, maybe, or you can leave your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Meanwhile,
waiting for that, let me say one thing to Pablo, which I know he picked up on, but just to emphasize. So I think the two issues discussed with regard to Marxism. One is whether the theory of all power to the workers is a good idea, and we have our reservations about that. We discussed in the book. We're about empowering the workers, but also within a liberal democracy framework. So you have constraints on power, which matter for everyone. But I think, just when you put up the picture of Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao, I think it's a very vivid reminder that what Marxism really created in every version that I'm aware of, and I spent a lot of time in the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe in the 1990s, for example, it was always about getting power into the hands of a few people, the Communist Party, people of the Communist Party, who had their own vision, right, Pablo? They had their vision for society, and technology was part of that. It's very interesting that we talk about this in the book. Stalin bought a lot of machines from the Americans in the 1930s, which he used. Those same machines, the combine harvesters and the tractors, had been the basis of what the Americans, will always tell you is their democracy, which is the farmers and people who own their own farms. That same technology was used in collectivization of agriculture and, destroying family farms and destroying people in the collectivization process. So I think vision oligarchs, you reminded me, Pablo, that Stalin and Mao were vision oligarchs of a very particular and, extremely dangerous to their own people and other people kind.
Well, people are shy with English, but I can translate the questions if you write it in Spanish also. But in the meantime, I have a few questions. One is how do we, technologies can be a little unpredictable, we don't know the real effects. So how have you thought about that? How do we assess where to go? And the other question is more okay, we have the political system and we have productivity technology, but I feel like a lot of new technologies, everyone is afraid of new technologies affecting the political system, like that you can increase polarization, you can have fake news. Before the fear was okay, they're going to create such a big bomb that they will blow us all and we're all dead, right? But now it seems that, okay, we accept formal democracy. We don't have an autocrat. We don't have a formal dictator, but we can have these technologies be used to manipulate the democratic system somehow. And I wonder, I can imagine perfectly that ChatGPT can be used to create some way of manipulating people into voting in certain ways. So how have you thought about that?
Well, yeah, so very good questions. Let's take the second one first. So chapter 10, which is the chapter that I'm sure can be published in China, is all about using technology to shape opinions and to, let's say, build more effective propaganda machines. Now, some of those propaganda machines, the chapter contrasts Facebook with the Communist Party of China, right? Because there are corporate propaganda machines, which are mostly about competing for your attention and getting ad dollars as a result, but also making you very angry, because making you angry will get more of your attention, right? And that's an important part of what drives our political polarization. I mean, meaning everyone's everywhere. But there's also, if you want to put out a line, if you want to persuade people. So the mind control of Vladimir Putin in Russia, for example, is quite dramatic and shocking, because when I worked in the former Soviet Union in the 1990s, the view was that the belief system around Soviet communism had collapsed already in the 1980s. And it wasn't very convincing, and people were just looking for a way out. But what appears is that Putin has figured out how to tie technology with nationalism, and maybe go back to beliefs that existed before the communist regime. So it's back into the time of the czars, and then harness that through some traditional media, by the way, very effective use of state-run television, but also a lot of online media. So you can find, I mean, Russian citizens can look at the internet, any version of the internet, and they're not restricted in their access to information, but they are brainwashed, I would say, by this very effective and toxic combination. And the authoritarians have got good at this only in the last 10 years or so. Remember the Arab Spring, just more than a decade ago, was overturning of some autocracies by people who wanted to be more democratic, and the autocrats in the Middle East were not ready for that. Well, they caught up quickly, by the way, and they've adapted, and they're using this technology to further their own regime. So I think that's and the United States, I think, Bernardo, is very vulnerable to another turn in that direction. Honestly, it's a very worrying moment right now. Now, on the unpredictability of technology, this, of course, is very important. So we have unpredictable upside and downside. Now, Pablo is a central banker, will like this, right? So whenever we do, we should always have error bands, right? We should have an upside and downside around baseline always. It's very important. A lot of times forecasters don't do this. So the downside would be what I just talked about, social media. We did not anticipate social media would have these negative social consequences. So we're dealing with some downside manifestations. But let's remember there can also be upside. So COVID vaccines, which are controversial some places, I understand, but I'm a big fan and I've had all the shots. mRNA vaccines, that technology was not developed for vaccines against SARS-CoV-2 type viruses. It was being developed for cancer treatments. The scientists who were working on that therapy reimagined what they could do, and repositioned and designed, or maybe they substantially designed a vaccine within 48 hours of seeing the sequencing of the genome of the virus. So that's the upside, I would say, Bernardo, which is one reason we want science, and we want to invest a lot in science, is for things we know we want to have better therapies for cancer, obviously. That's important for all of us. But there's also things that we don't know what the crisis will be next time, what shock will hit us. And being ready for that, and having scientific abilities that you can deploy, but that requires vision and direction. And that requires saying, look, here's a problem, we have to solve this, social priority number one, right? And we do this occasionally, but it's pretty haphazard. And it's also fairly national centric, right? So we did a lot of vaccine for the US, and other people had to scramble to get vaccine. So I think more science, more scientific knowledge, more sharing of science, more sharing of the benefits of science is a very good way to push ourselves towards that upside. And you know, we mustn't forget about the jobs. I mean, that's the point of this book, which is creating jobs, creating technology that is complementary to humans and boost their productivity, even if they don't have a lot of education. That's a missing piece. But if you can do that, and you can do that, and if you can show people how to make money doing that, okay, that's an American fascination, making money, right? But it is, as Pablo said, incentives matter. Then I think we can get something really good out of this technological transformation.
Okay, I'm gonna let Salvador Valdez talk. Let me see if it works. Salvador, are you there?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. We do not see you, but we hear you.
Okay. Simon, could you give some historical examples where governments could direct technology in a positive way without creating white elephants, which are very expensive and costly? South Korea invested a lot on steel industry, and it failed miserably. So could you give some positive examples?
Sure. Well, in October, well, actually, the beginning of before 1940, the U.S. federal government spent basically nothing on science and technology, zero. In 1940, President Roosevelt was persuaded, actually primarily by Vannevar Bush, who was a former dean of engineering at MIT and was head of the Carnegie Endowment, Carnegie Institution in Washington, D.C. He was persuaded that he should mobilize all the scientific talent in the U.S. to develop weapons and other forms of national security, because it appeared pretty obvious by the end of May 1940 that the Germans had made some big advances in military technology. So that group, pulled together by Bush, had a number of big breakthroughs, including in the development of smaller, more portable radar sets that became ubiquitous, modern air navigation and so on. And it's the group that also invented, and that approach brought us the Manhattan Project, which of course was a mixed blessing. After that, after World War II and after 1945, we had the creation of the National Science Foundation. We had all of the financing of modern research universities in the United States that comes from the federal government, which is substantial, flowed out of that thinking. And much of that was further increased after the Russians launched their Sputnik satellite in October 1957, and the Americans responded by spending more on the space program, but also with the National Defense Education Act of 1958, which made it possible which expanded a lot of university places to study science and technology, what we'd now call STEM. And it made it much easier to go to college if you didn't have any money to start with. So all of those transformations, I think, are very positive, and they've led to many positive, beneficial innovations. And John Gruber and I wrote an entire book, which I'm happy to send anyone. I don't think we translated this one to Spanish. Perhaps the title sounded a little limiting, but Jumpstarting America is all about why we did those things, how they work, the big spillover effects of scientific innovation. I think, though, Salvador, that the very important point you're making is that many times when we can, investing in general science and pushing knowledge forward has many positive spillover effects and lots of products created that we use every day. But if you get into specific industrial policy where you say we must have this industry, or we must have this company in this industry do the following things, that can go wrong. And so there's a very active debate right now in the US about, well, some people are rebranding industrial policy as industrial strategy. But I think the real question is, if you're going to do anything with policy that impacts the commercial sector, how much of it should be just general knowledge and then let everyone commercialize what they want, and how much should be more guiding them towards certain missions or goals, and how much should be about picking, if not picking winners, at least picking industries as the priority. I think we are seeking better answers and more precise answers on all of this, which is healthy. We probably won't go fully the full-blown industrial policy of traditional times, but I think we'll be more assertive, and we'll be investing more in shared capabilities and strategic industries. Semiconductors has obviously been selected for this treatment, and we'll see what kind of benefits that brings and at what cost.
Okay, I have a question by Alfredo Coronel. He basically says, like, I will reframe the question. It's like, data right now is power, right? And as you have said, a reason that the US is going to the semiconductor is because it's worried at least about China. And I will guess China, because it doesn't care about confidentiality and all these kind of liberal values, doesn't have much of a problem collecting data that is private, while the US can be, in a way, have one hand behind his back and cannot. I mean, what can it do when data is now kind of its power, and can they compete with China in that regard? What can you do, like, you know?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, and obviously data is the key, and large amounts of data. Actually, you need two things to own the future, Bernardo. You need data and you need electricity. And the reason you need electricity is to train the next generation of models. You need more electricity than is available in North America. So the large tech companies are shopping around the world for places they can put their model training facilities, places that have extra electricity or readily available fossil fuels, so that it doesn't have to be transported to market. Okay. Interestingly, though, Bernardo, data can be and is compartmentalized. So Chinese data are not readily available to outsiders, and we are very reluctant to let our American, we're not always careful with how our data is handled inside the United States, but we are very reluctant to let it travel outside the United States. And TikTok is a big source of controversy right now in the US, because TikTok is obviously owned by ByteDance. It's a Chinese company, and therefore the question is, when you make a goofy video, are you somehow revealing things about yourself or something else that's going to advantage the Chinese? I think that's a bit exaggerated personally. But the reason we're going to semiconductors is not about data. It's about security of supply chains, and it's geopolitics, and it's a lot of the key semiconductor supplier to the US is Taiwan, and Taiwan Semiconductor. The package of policies that you've seen around the Chips and Science Act is designed and is bringing Taiwan Semiconductor to the United States. Now, we'd like to create jobs, but it doesn't create a ton of jobs, right? These highly automated factories. What we don't want is key components to be compromised by geopolitical actions. If I can use the vague language of the IMF that Pablo will recognize here. Taiwan is a great friend of the United States. Taiwan is not the issue. The issue is what might happen to Taiwan. And the issue is where are you making the latest semiconductors in particular? The ones that are, which there are years, takes you years to improve the design, produce it, mass produce it. You want to being at that cutting edge has some definite geopolitical advantages, and losing access to trusted suppliers would be a problem. And people are very worried about Taiwan.
Pablo?
So I have a question regarding your question for us. There are two angles here. One is, let's say, a country like Chile, we can play more catch up than rather innovate. And technologies like ChatGPT or AI can help us, for instance, bridge the literacy gap, the English literacy gap, the problem with understanding English by broad population, with ChatGPT, essentially you solve that. But so it can be very complementary to low skill or medium skill workers rather than a competition, if the idea is to catch up. If you are on the frontier, maybe it's different, but I think the complementarity is better for us. The other thing is related to the last point you were making on the friend shoring, or that there is within the politics, there is a point on choosing with who do you relate to. Let's say there is this current tension about electric batteries. There are a number of technologies to develop batteries. How do you fit in that as a country, right? How do you set your strategic alliances? And if you are a provider of raw materials, it might be pretty crucial. We are extremely exposed to China because of our export basket to there from copper and lithium. But as many would argue, that's not an association we may feel extremely comfortable politically if push comes to shove, right? So how can we take a position in those difficult trade-offs? It's not straightforward. I know it's maybe an unfair question, but given that you ask, I think it's fair that we get pitch your brain as well.
Oh, I think they're very fair questions. Look, on the first one, let's be a little inspirational and say, what we need is more voices from places like Chile and many other places that say, this is what we need. These are our problems. Help us solve this problem, right? Because your problems are not, I'm afraid, on the forefront of the minds of people in Silicon Valley, right? They live very different lives. They have very different daily realities. So some articulation of this is the problem, this is what we can do ourselves, this is what else we need, this is how AI could empower that. That's really inspiring, Pablo. And that, I think, you can get a lot of attention. And now, if it's, I don't think that takes you, don't think that will change the design of foundation models, these very big models. But we're talking now about developing applications of those foundations, right? And pulling that in directions that will be useful to you, closing literacy gaps of various kinds. For example, breaking down the gap between Spanish and English. I think those are brilliant ideas. And get everybody who's a Spanish-speaking country on board with that. That then becomes a very big market, right? And a really interesting prospect. On the friendshoring, look, I think there are two issues, right? One is who has the minerals. But these are fairly dispersed around the world. The processing of critical minerals, Pablo, I think is the key constraint here. That's done disproportionately by China. Maybe it's their tolerance of environmental costs. It may be what you said about increasing returns to scale. We can discuss that. But I think that this is increasingly identified by the Americans as a crucial bottleneck and something that they don't want that to hold back clean energy transition. They don't want it to be completely derailed by that also. I think that American firms are what's called the term is right now de-risking away from China. They're diversifying. And so where they invest and what the alternative supply chains and how that is regarded as being more secure or at least diversified, right? That, I mean, we were very, American corporate sector certainly, and many other people were, American business schools, were very focused on efficiency for 4 decades. And COVID reminded us that if I'm very efficient and I have wafer thin margins and I run it all through one place and that place shuts down, I've got a problem. And so bringing diversification into that as efficiency considerations is very important as public policy. Whether anybody will pay you money to diversify is an interesting question. But the question I have for American firms is, if you're not already diversifying away from China, you're the ones who are going to have to answer the questions when tariffs are imposed or other forms of conflict arise. And here's a big development that you may not have noticed in Chile. China in 1972 leased America pandas, the iconic panda from China, 1972. This week they pulled all their pandas. The last panda was taken out of the United States, actually in a FedEx truck, FedEx plane. All the pandas have gone home. That tells you something, Pablo, right? That rapprochement, that 50-year phase of geopolitical closeness or attempting to be friendly between the US and China, that phase is over. Now, what the next phase looks like, we don't know. Maybe it'll also be friendly, but the panda diplomacy phase was ended this week.
Okay, I think we have enough. Thank you for your time. This was great. And I invite everyone to buy the book. Thank you so much. Thank you, Pablo.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye. I'll send you the video. Bye.
Thank you.